This is the acknowledgments in the book Riding the Dragon by Robert J. Wicks, who's a professor at Loyola in Maryland. I am grateful for the wonderful, gentle, and hopeful stories shared with me by Carol Berry, Veronica Kavanaugh Kennedy, Lucille Winston, Louise Arends, and Cindy Boland. Stories like yours help me and others to find and deepen and share ours. Thank you. The help Karen Felder offered me while typing and retyping version after version of this book with care and quiet enthusiasm kept me on track. This little book was in process for almost 2 years, so her patience and attention to detail made all the difference. Finally, for her deep, honest, and loving review of this and all my previous books, I can't put into words my appreciation for my wife, Michelle. When I have had the faith and courage to ride the dragons in my life, she has had to take much of the heat in order to help me back on when I fell off. Thank you, and I love you. Gotta love a man who's going to give regard to his wife and acknowledge her. Okay, intro. Every problem has 2 handles. You can grab it by the handle of fear or the handle of hope. Margaret Mitchell. Very wise words to live by. A young woman who was studying to be a counselor volunteered some of her free time to sing and play the organ for funerals at her church. During one such occasion, a small, slender little boy came upstairs to the music loft to see her after the service. For him to come upstairs alone was a little odd, since children usually don't wander around at a funeral. She asked him if he knew where his parents were. He told her in a very matter-of-fact way, "Well, my mommy's downstairs, and she said I could come up to see you, but my daddy is over there," pointing to the casket downstairs. Unbeknownst to her, the boy was the son of the man who had just died. She caught her breath and willed herself not to cry, since she was sure this boy had seen enough tears already. She could not help but wonder to herself, though, what in the world was his mother thinking to send him up here? Trying to smile, she looked at him and said, "Oh." As a counseling student, she thought, there must be something better to say to a 7-year-old boy who had just lost his father. As it turned out, that one word was sufficient. It reassured him and gave him hope, gave him enough confidence to then tell her, "That song about eagle's wings was my daddy's favorite song. He sung it real loud in church. Now it's my favorite song too." In response, she nodded her head, smiled, and didn't say another word for fear of crying. The young boy then went over to the balcony rail and looked down at the casket and beautiful white lace cover over it sitting in the aisle. He turned round, looked at the young woman, touched the organ keys very quickly, and ran down the stairs. As he left, she tried to say goodbye, but he was gone before she could get the words out. Several minutes later, the widow came upstairs apologizing for her son's intrusion. The young woman reassured her that it was no problem. The boy's mother proceeded to tell her that her son had not spoken one word, cried, or eaten solid food since his dad had died, and then she thanked her for playing on the eagle's wings because it had opened him up. Oh, that's so sweet. The Lord works in mysterious ways. I love that song too. His name, as she learned later, was David Jr., after his dad, and all she would ever know about him was that his favorite song was On Eagle's Wings. Yet she didn't need to know more. The experience itself was enough. It had nurtured her, and she had helped this sad little boy to open up a bit so he could begin to grieve and start to let go. Of course, life doesn't always turn out this way. Poignant healing interactions are rare. Instead, the air seems polluted with negative events, troubled people, and endless demands that quietly drag us down until we finally hit bottom without realizing how we got there. Several years ago, I remember returning home after a day of seeing patients in my private practice. When I came in, my wife, Michelle, asked me how my day was. I was ready to say the usual, almost automatic, "Fine," but I was overcome with such a deep sense of sadness that I said, "Terrible." "Why? What happened?" she asked. "Did someone say something or do something to ruin your day?" "No," I replied. "Then what makes you say your day was terrible?" because as I went to answer you, I realized I just felt like crying. Looking at her, I sat down on a kitchen chair without taking off my raincoat. Then, as I have taught others, I reviewed the day to see what had happened, what I had blown out of proportion, what erroneous negative belief I was allowing to engulf me. And then I recognized what it was. It wasn't one specific thing. It was a series of almost unrecognizable ones. It wasn't some great problem I had to deal with that day. Instead, as I sat there reflecting, I began to see that over the past few weeks, without realizing it, I had begun to absorb people's anxiety, sadness, helplessness, and hopelessness until I could no longer continue to help them. I had taken it all the abuse, loneliness, financial and marital difficulties, sexual addictions, and interpersonal rebuffs, angers, and hardships, and I felt slowly defeated by them. I could now fully appreciate what a student once shared with me in a reflection paper. I am amazed that so much sadness can fit into my body. I think that no matter how intelligent we are or how well we take care of ourselves, both acute and chronic stress will occasionally occur. I have learned in my work, though, that the trauma, pressures, busyness, and darkness around us are not the only problems. The real difficulty arises when we don't sit down regularly to take the measure of our lives, whether the times be good or difficult. Paradoxically, difficult times can offer graced moments in a more striking way than the good times can. Through reflection, they can bring us back to the recognition that we can't avoid all trauma or stress. Moreover, we are called neither to win nor to abandon the fight to be a sensitive, joyful, compassionate person, but we are called to live fully. Yet we also must appreciate that we can only rid the world of darkness through those ways available to us. Often we seek security by either running away from our feelings of discouragement or attempting to conquer them. Instead, we need to stay with them. In Jungian terms, we need to make friends with our shadow. The Zen masters have another way of saying this. We need to learn to ride the dragon. How we can do this is a subject that I will develop in this brief book. We need to see how we have relied too much on ourselves, and that in focusing on the problems of the world, we have often forgotten to see what is beautiful and right in it. In an interview in the magazine Common Boundary a number of years ago, the Zen Roshi teacher, Thich Nhat Hanh, said, "During the Vietnam War, we were so busy helping the wounded that we sometimes forgot to smell the flowers. Night has a very pleasant smell here, especially in the country, but we would forget to pay attention to that smell of the mint, coriander, thyme, and sage." We could see this awareness in the hopeful attitude of those professionals who helped out after the September 11th terrorist attack. They had seen the cruelty and devastation, but they also saw the goodness in all those working together on the scene. Sitting down with all our own life in a gentle, clear-headed way can remind us of the beauty right before us. Reflection and small significant actions based on what we learn each day about ourselves and life can't eliminate the natural stresses of life or its pain. However, a well-spent time out can help us to prevent unnecessary suffering, to learn from pain. We shouldn't avoid, and to pay attention to the mint, coriander, thyme, and sage that are the fragrances of our lives, no matter what the circumstances, fully appreciating our journey as we are living it, not seeking or settling for elusive future fantasies or becoming mired down in mere nostalgia is what really matters. Balancing compassion for others with a deep kindness and reverence for our own inner self-care. Self can actually be quite simple and powerful if we take the time to do it right. To do this, we need the psychological and spiritual tools with which to work, what author Margaret Mitchell calls the handle of hope. I have learned this time and again from reflecting on my own life and the unusual and rewarding work I do with others. My clients are very challenging people, professional helpers and healers. When physicians, nurses, psychotherapists, ministers, relief workers, or educators become temporarily lost or overwhelmed, I walk with them. When the intensity of their efforts to help others causes them to experience confusion, turmoil, darkness, distress, or trauma, I work to help them make sense of it all. Since these clients are engaged in the healing professions themselves, they don't allow me much margin for error. They want and expect brief, powerful interventions for the burnout and or loss of perspective. While working with this unique population, I have come to understand that not only excuse me, are these helpers learning comforting, hard-won wisdom, they are they are also teaching me important ways to open new doors of psychological liberation and inner spiritual rejuvenation. If we are willing to spend a little time each day reflecting on our lives and learning these simple truths, we will benefit from the wisdom of self-care. With brief, powerful interventions, we can quickly chart a clearer course each day to uncover healing psychological and spiritual truths, no matter how stressful the day might be. Given all we have experienced recently, if ever a resource were needed, it is now. Although I have found that reflecting on proven insights from my own clinical practice was a valuable resource, the insights alone were not sufficient. More important is being faithful to the wisdom I have gleaned from an array of spiritual traditions on how to discover and strengthen our inner selves. I need to be aware of and faithful to both the spiritual and psychological in order to live fully myself as I support the others who come to me as well. Essential psychological and spiritual wisdom. Early in his wonderful book, After the Ecstasy, the Laundry, American Buddhist teacher Jack Kornfield warns about the care we should take in embarking on a true inner journey. Most people, if asked, say they want to live a rich, spiritual, and psychologically aware life. However, making such a commitment, while laudable and understandable, is more serious and has greater consequences than many realize. It is not an easy commitment to undertake and remain faithful to in today's world. Kornfield illustrates this. When the Tibetan teacher Chogyam Trungpa arrived late, as usual, to a crowded San Francisco lecture hall, he offered a refund to anyone who did not want to stay. He warned those who were new that a true spiritual path is arduous and demanding, involving one insult after another, so he suggested that those with doubts not embark. If you haven't started, it's best not to begin. Then he looked steadily around the room and said, but if you have begun, it is best to finish, emphasis added. Once again, to finish the journey today, fathoming both psychological and spiritual wisdom is imperative. With an appreciation of this, in the spring of 1988, I wrote to the well-known spiritual guide and author Henry Nouwen. I wanted to offer him some encouragement at a time of great inner crisis in his own life. At the same time, I wanted to bring him up to date to the next book I was planning to write and ask if he thought there was any merit to it. The theme of the book addressed the psychological perils of spiritual intimacy. My feeling was that this might strike a chord with him, especially at what was a tender juncture in his own life. As it turned out, I was right, because he wrote the following gracious response. Dear Bob, thanks so much for your good letter. I really appreciate your staying in touch and support during this time of my life. I have still not returned to Daybreak, and it might take me a few more months before I am able to do so, but I am gradually discovering some new inner strength and hope very much that I will be able to continue my ministry with the large community before too long. It means a lot to me that you keep in touch and that you are willing to support me with your prayers. If anything holds me up, it is the prayers of friends, and I rely on them. What I am experiencing is a really deep spiritual crisis in which I realize that God wants all of my heart, not simply a part of it. It seems as if he wants to test my faithfulness and my commitment in new ways. He is really asking me to let go of everything that does not bring me closer to him. He calls me to a more generous prayer life and to a more fearless ministry. This year is a kind of desert year to purify my heart. It is painful, but also full of grace. Meanwhile, I hope that your summer will be good and creative, and most of all, prayerful. I am very interested in your new book. I am even curious to know which psychological perils you have in mind. I am so used to reading about the spiritual perils of psychological intimacy that I am very curious to know more about the psychological perils of spiritual intimacy. Enclosed, I send you a little book just published as a sign of friendship and love. With warm greetings, yours, Henry. Although Henry's interest and curiosity concerning my approach should have been enough to nudge me to proceed, for various reasons I set the idea aside. Then a decade later, an event in my life made me return to and deepen the project. It was an unexpected dark journey of my own, which confused and overwhelmed me. It was also the added impetus to structure the